All right, a reminder that this is being recorded so that we can make this accessible for everyone. If you'd like to access this meeting later, it will be uploaded on the Arch YouTube page. And then one special note, we will not be admitting AI companions into meetings. We do record meetings, and as a matter of course, we would like to have the opportunity to redact if necessary to protect confidentiality. And so we basically record it so that you don't have to. If you need just the text of it, we can offer that to you, or the recording, the video recording, or it together. And so, so thank you for your understanding in that regard. So with regard to updates, we have a number of them from the national level down to the local level. So last month, we talked about the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Appropriations Bill. There's been a short-term federal spending bill that was passed in January, which with bipartisan support to keep the federal government open and operating through February. And it gave new deadlines in March for passing the 12 annual federal appropriations bills for fiscal year 2024. And the THUD bill was one of them, which is the one that I know is of utmost concern to us. Leaders of the U.S. House of Representatives and Senate THUD Appropriations Subcommittee announced on the 16th that they had reached a deal on the final fiscal year funding levels for HUD's housing and homelessness programs. However, neither bill provides sufficient funding to renew all existing housing choice voucher contracts upon turnover. So under the Senate bill, an estimated 80,000 vouchers would be lost, and under the House bill, 112,000 vouchers would be lost. And I found out that in Louisiana, that would be somewhere between 1,700 and 2,300 vouchers. So the announcement comes ahead of a 2-week-long House recess. Members of both the House and the Senate are currently out of their DC offices this week. With the Senate members, they'll be returning on February 26th and the House members on February 28th. And they have until March 1st, just 3 days after the House reconvenes, to finalize and enact the 4 fiscal year appropriations bills that includes the THUD bill. So we're going to keep our eyes on that, and please, if you are so inclined, reach out to your members of Congress to let them know that we must fully fund all existing voucher and rental assistance programs. I know that we want more, but at the very least, we need it to be what it is now. And then we need an increase for funding for public housing operations and repairs. So please, and we'll be sending out a newsletter that will give you quick links to do that, to speak to your members of Congress, so you don't have to research all that information. Last month, we also talked about how congressional leaders had announced a bipartisan tax proposal that expands the child tax credit and certain provisions to LIHTC, which is the low-income housing tax credit. And I wanted to share that the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities reported last week that it's particularly of interest to children and families with low incomes who live in rural areas. And so it would estimate to affect 16 million children and families with low incomes in rural areas. And so there are some key reforms that still have to happen there, but our region, includes several rural parishes, and so we will be keeping an eye on this as it progresses. We also talked about a case that is going to be considered by the Supreme Court. It's Johnson versus Grants Pass. And it's a case that will essentially decide if cities are allowed to punish people experiencing homelessness by issuing jail time tickets and fines for sleeping on the streets, even when there's no shelter alternatives available to them. And I know we talked about that last month, but we didn't know if it would be heard in the spring or the fall. Well, now we know that SCOTUS will hear oral arguments on April 22nd. And there will be a decision made by June 30th. And this is, although, it most directly affects the Northwestern and Western states, once SCOTUS makes a ruling, it will be applicable to cities across the country as precedent. And so we need to keep an eye on that a serious eye on that. And there will be an in-person rally on April 22nd in DC, if anyone is so inclined to make that trip. Something else that is a little bit convoluted, but I'm going to do my best to keep it succinct, is there is efforts and a pilot program being made to utilize Medicaid for housing. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and HUD have announced that 8 states and the District of Columbia have been selected to participate in this new initiative. It's called the Housing and Services Partnership Accelerator, but they're calling it the Accelerator. And basically what it is it's allowing people to maximize resources and connect the healthcare needs with the obvious that we know, the needs around housing and shelter. So states can support healthcare access through Medicaid, and it'll provide services like housing transition services, case management that avoids lease violations, but also security deposits, rental application fees, and other specific transitions. So we'll be following this in the event that it gets expanded. Louisiana is not one of the pilot states, but if you're curious, the states include Arizona, California, the District of Columbia, Hawaii, Maryland, Massachusetts, Minnesota, North Carolina, and Washington. So not all progressive states. So we will, I'm hopeful that if this shows that it's an effective program, that it'll be allowed to be expanded to the rest of our states. Continuum of Care awards, they were announced by HUD. I'm pleased to report that all of our existing programs were fully funded, but by that, I just want to be clear that that means that they were awarded the amounts for which they were eligible to apply, not that their programs are fully funded, right? So I want to be super clear about that. And those awards were included adjustments made to changes in fair market rents, which we know have been significant from last year to this year. We're in the early stages of getting feedback on our application and talking with other COCs across the state to essentially compare notes. And a reminder that this funding stream does not cover any emergency shelter or street outreach funding whatsoever. Okay, so this is primarily for housing related, transitional housing, permanent supportive housing, et cetera, those types of programs. LHC announced the 2024 Louisiana Housing Conference, Building Thriving Communities, the Nexus of Housing, Economic Development, and Healthcare. And it will be October 27th through the 29th in Baton Rouge. So get that on your calendars now. Registration is already available, and sponsorship opportunities are available if you know of any businesses that might be interested. And they're available on the conference website. And I also just wanted to congratulate Marjoriana Willman, who's the new permanent ED. She was appointed yesterday of LHC. She's been interim since October, and before that she was legal counsel, I believe. And so we're really excited to have her on board as the new leadership for LHC. I want to kind of open it up for a moment and see if there are any updates from any agencies, community groups, individuals, either in this room or online. If you're online, you can go ahead and just take yourself off mute. If you're in the room, I would appreciate it if you came up here just to make sure everybody could hear you. All right. So one other thing before we get started, it's the beginning of the year and it's your opportunity to become a member of our continuum of care. While our funded agencies are, incredibly important members, it also takes coordinated efforts by our local government, other nonprofit organizations, community groups, and individuals to make this collaborative effort to end homelessness work. And so there are membership levels created and accessible for every single person. If you're an individual and you want to be a member of the COC, please be a member of the COC. If you are a for-profit business, but somehow that work intersects, or you want to have a voice in this conversation, there's a membership level available to you. And we make the pricing accessible to everyone. There are sliding scales. And so no one is left behind when it comes to being included in the continuum of care. That being said, I want to tell you what the benefits of membership is. So in addition to these general meetings, which we are committed to keeping free, hybrid, and open to the public so that they're accessible to everyone, there are a number of benefits to joining the COC in a more formal capacity. So nonprofit organizations who are in good standing for at least 12 months will qualify to apply for HUD ESG and or COC funding. So if your organization is interested in applying or going through that process, please join, because you will have to be a member in good standing for 12 months. We're going to be having quarterly in-person, well-facilitated town halls for COC members only. And we're going to be talking about strategy, and we're going to be talking about utilizing the collective impact model in order to address the spectrum of and the continuum from homelessness to housing and everything in between. So make sure if you want to be involved in those town halls that you become a member of the COC. We're also going to have trainings available free of charge for those who have become members. And that means that your whole staff, if you're looking for a staff opportunity for your workplace, send your staff to these trainings. Community group members can come, and then individuals, of course. And those areas of focus will be trauma-informed care, DEI in the social service space, fair housing, mainstream benefits, and housing first model. So there will be 5, if not more, intensive trainings that will be available to your staff, to you individually, or to your community group. And then you will also get a monthly online digest of resources and advocacy opportunities. So more than what I'm just doing at the beginning of each of these meetings. And it'll be an opportunity for you to have in your inbox a library of articles and things of that nature that are available to you that are timely. We're going to be having a yearly in-person social gathering for the COC members, because we don't always remember to stop and celebrate each other. And of course, there'll be a discounted rate for members for ARCH ticketed events, which we know right now of at least 2. So there are a lot of perks. Your voice is vital to this conversation, and it's an opportunity for you and your staff to get a lot of content and a lot of extra training in areas that are really, frankly, and we were just talking about this, applicable to any business or service agency. We should all be leading with a trauma-informed approach in the way we treat one another, because frankly, we've all been through some sort of trauma in our lives. So you will receive an email link for membership registration today or tomorrow. And funded agencies will be in receipt of their yearly invoices, which you know are determined by your award amount. So you'll be getting those invoices automatically from Nicole Phillips, who's in the back of the room, our beloved COC manager. And I believe that today is also her 3rd year work anniversary. So she's really upset with me right now. I, without further ado, would like to welcome today's guest, Sarah Johnson from Home Coalition and from LSNDC, which you're going to learn more about, to join us for an important conversation around collaboration and networking and sustainability. And right now I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can see your face better in this room. Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much. If you wouldn't mind, could you introduce yourself and talk about your role at Home Coalition first? Let's tackle that first, and maybe a little bit about how you got to this work.
Okay, can you hear me all right?
Yep. Thank you.
I'm Elsa's counterpart in the Monroe area. It is so nice to watch a COC meeting that's so well run. Ours tend to be a little more rollicking, I think. I have been the first director of the Home Coalition that we ever had. Before that, we were operated by different volunteers with the service agencies. I became the director in 2013. Before that, I was working in the social services field as a marketing and fund development director for a large nonprofit in this area. And before that, I had an entire career in the for-profit world in marketing. So the social services world was kind of eye-opening for me when I switched over at roughly 2000 to do that.
So can you talk a little bit about like, what is this service area? You know, ours is 8 parishes with Lafayette right in the center. So what is your service area and what's your mission?
Ours is the 12 Northeast Louisiana parishes. So we include the geographic area, goes as far west as Ruston. It goes as far south as Columbia, and then goes all the way over to the Mississippi River and includes East Carroll Parish, West Carroll, which are Tensas. Those are some of the statistically poorest parishes in the country. We are considered a rural COC. Our only non-rural area is actually the city of Monroe, which is right in the middle of our continuum. So our geographic area is 7,000 square miles. So it's difficult to do outreach in that area, that broad a space. So we have to do a lot of collaborative work with people in those various communities to really cover the area like we need to.
And just to clarify, are you a one-woman show at Home Coalition, or do you have a staff, or are you manning a fort alone?
My philosophy for continuum work is I don't want the continuum to provide services if there are other local providers here that do that. And there are. So our continuum doesn't provide any direct services. So our staff is small. We have a staff of 2. It's me, I'm the executive director. We also have an HMIS director, Christy Whetstone. We both work from a home office. As you can see, I put the cats in the back so they wouldn't come in here and give y'all a hard time. We are hiring another person to manage our coordinated entry process and also back up me as an assistant director.
That's great news. So can you tell us then about your partner agencies and the services that they provide, since you all choose not to provide direct services?
Sure, and I didn't tell you the mission. Ours is to create a community where everybody has safe, affordable housing and they feel valued. We're really blessed in our service providers. We have 3 that are for our area large. The largest one is the Wellspring. They serve the northeast quadrant of the state. They're best known for domestic violence services. They're one of the largest domestic violence providers in the state, but they also provide the majority of homeless services in this area too. I call them the Piccadilly of misery, because whatever your problem is, they've got some kind of program for it. They do, in addition to the homeless services and domestic violence, they do counseling. They have some children's services, their sexual assault center. So they do a lot of work. We have one of the state's best runaway and homeless youth providers, which is Christopher Youth Center. And they have a shelter for youth ages, I think it's 11 to 17. And they serve youth defined as up to age 25 with rapid rehousing, transitional housing. They do outreach for youth throughout our 12 parishes. They work with schools for homeless families, the families of students who were homeless. And then we have Easter Seals here, which provides a lot of services for seriously mentally ill persons who are homeless. And that includes transition. They they have a small number of emergency shelter beds for that population, far smaller than we need. They also have transitional housing and permanent supportive housing. They are the PATH grantees, so they do a good bit of street outreach in this area.
We had a question that just came up in the chat, and I wanted to pivot to that for a second. Can you talk to us about what your pit count looks like with so many rural areas? I know that you have feelings about it, and I'm curious, we're just coming out of it. So if you want to talk about your experience, and do you all have specific techniques that you utilize?
I think, as you know, Elsa, from hearing me talk about it, the pit is a horrible way to estimate homelessness. It is a 1-day sample from a 365-day universe, which means the likelihood of error, if you use that to establish your understanding of homelessness, is nearly 100%. We now have access to actual data of people who reach out for assistance through the homeless services system. Our pit count typically is under 200. So when you look at that, it's like any given day, we might have maybe 150 people to 200 people who are homeless. We have to do outreach through our partner agencies, and that's a best practice for doing any kind of outreach in rural parishes, especially ones that are as vast as ours are. We connect. The faith community provides a lot of social services in our area particularly. So we do a lot of outreach to the various churches in the region. We do outreach to law enforcement. We did this past week, or as our pit got moved to this week, actually, because our area was hit so badly by the ice storm. We network with law enforcement, and we meet with them regularly or communicate with them regularly, and they almost are a sort of unofficial outreach network for us. So I check in regularly with them. We have sort of an unofficial protocol with them. So when they find somebody who's encamped, or a lot of times we'll see people, families especially, in cars at Walmart or at convenience stores, big truck stops, they will reach out to us or send an email or text and notify us that they have found somebody and where that household is. People up here can also call 211 and report if they are aware of someone who is homeless somewhere, and so that we can send outreach staff to respond to that.
I love that you have such a strong partnership with your law enforcement, and that it's a safe resource for you all to partner with. If you want to talk a little bit about what you see right now as your COC's greatest strengths, and what are you struggling with?
I think our greatest strength is our people. And you told me you were going to ask me that, and that's really, we have so many people here who aren't willing to accept we can't do that as an answer. They keep on till we figure out some way to do things. And there are key people throughout the region, and I'm sure it's that way in your region too, that group of people are sort of the go-to people who can network with each other, or get the mayor on the phone, on a moment's notice or something like that, that nobody up here wants to have our people do without. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. So we push really hard, and sometimes we get rude about it to try to make people aware of what people need, and to try to find resources to provide that for people. So I think that persistence in the face of challenges is probably our greatest strength. As far as what we're struggling with here, we have a huge segment of our homeless population that are families with children, more so than other areas of the state, and certainly more so than nationally. At least half of our people up here who are homeless are children. So homelessness looks different up here. We have anybody who's unsheltered, who's not a domestic violence victim, and who's not an unaccompanied child, there's 14 shelter beds for our entire region that can take them. So we have been pushing really hard to develop a shelter for families. Our Salvation Army is our primary, what I call a general shelter up here, and they have limitations in what their facility will allow them to do. They can't take anybody in a wheelchair. They can't take someone who's mobility impaired in some way. So we definitely have needs up here for that. We have not yet been successful in our efforts to seek funding for that. However, we have continued. That's why I know, Elsa, you've heard me on calls repeatedly say we're talking to our legislators about this and that. We're working really hard up here to get people to understand the powers that be, to understand that it's not okay for a child to be sleeping on the street. That's never okay. If we can't get that right in our state, then we haven't got the most important thing done.
Well, we've been on a lot of meetings together. And full disclosure, Sarah's been one of the people that I call when I'm not unsure of what I should do or how to navigate something. And I really have appreciated that. So what do you see as the benefit of our COCs across Louisiana coordinating and collaborating efforts, whether it's advocacy or administrative or just sharing updates?
There are actually 7 people in the state who do the job that Elsa and I do. And it could potentially be a very lonely experience of having that job. It's also incredibly daunting because the field we work in is highly technical. It changes very rapidly and the stakes are very high. If we make a mistake in our work, a program could lose funding, people could lose their jobs, or a family could lose their home if we made a mistake. So we actually serve sort of as a support group for each other, I think, to some extent. Like when I have, I think, everybody's cell phone number. And when, for example, we're working on the annual renewal process, I will text people, some of my counterparts, including Elsa, and say, what are you answering for XYZ question? Or like in Elsa's case, she said, she had a question she was thinking through, and she said, will you let me bounce this off you? I said, sure. But it's always, our industry or field is changing so much that it's always something new and it's fresh and exciting, but it's hard to keep up with everything. So we serve sort of as a backstop and encouragement for each other.
So let's pivot to LSNDC, which is just a bunch of letters, I think, to most people, myself included when I started this work. So can you tell us what that is and what is your role in that network?
Sure. That acronym stands for Louisiana Services Network Data Consortium. Back when Hurricane Katrina set Louisiana on its ear, the state was shocked to discover we didn't have any way to share information about when people were experiencing homelessness throughout the area. So HMIS was, of course, implemented at that time among the various continuums of care, but the different continuums weren't communicating with each other. So a nonprofit was formed about that time that all the different continuums of care participated in. As the nonprofit has a board, And each COC has 2 representatives on the board with a vote. One of them is usually the COC director, like Elsa and I serve on it. And the HMIS administrator, whoever that is usually on it also. That group has conference calls once every other month. We share technical information. We negotiate with the HMIS vendor to get better pricing than we could get individually. We share technical information and technical support for each other. At one time, we were even contracting with some of the COCs that had the more experienced HMIS managers who could actually resolve technical problems. It's pretty common that if a question comes up for one COC, odds are the other COCs have the same question. So the more experienced HMIS directors will submit a question to the vendor for that rather than each COC having to do that. So it potentially saves all of us a tremendous amount of time, stress trying to figure out how to implement the HMIS, which is not a simple process. I'm assuming the people in your meeting know what HMIS stands for. I tend to go off in acronym world when I get going.
So since LSNDC was as a response to Katrina, do you know that other states were already doing it or have subsequently done it? Are there equivalents across the country?
You asked me my role in it. The board has officers and I'm the board chair at present, probably because I'm the only one that didn't say no. I actually don't know, and that's a good question. There are different HMIS governance structures around the country. Some states have a statewide HMIS. Some states don't. I would expect if it's certainly beneficial to be able to work with the vendor, especially and deal with technical issues as a state from a state perspective. So even if I don't know that they would approach the problem like we did, which was to create an actual nonprofit LSNDC and handle it as a board, and that entity would negotiate with the vendor, but they must have something similar to that.
Gotcha. And I know that, there are things that are bubbling up when it comes to LSNDC, but where would you like to see it go in the future?
It really has struck me that we have a unique perspective on the breadth and depth of homelessness in the state. Like, it's really common to see the state allocate funding based on the point in time data. And as we discussed earlier, that's a dreadful way to assess need and the breadth of homelessness in a region. Because we've got all that data and access to the data, we can pretty quickly share it. And I would like to see us go an extra step and be a repository and a public resource where people can come and get information about how many people are homeless, where they are, what their needs are, the differences among the different regions in what kind of housing we need for people who are homeless, who's experiencing homelessness, how long homeless last, who's doing a good job of addressing that, who's not, why.
Right. Yeah, more evaluation of the data, and it has to live somewhere to be able to do that. So coincidentally, I also moved from communications into the social service space. And so what have you learned doing this work? Both LSNDC and your work with Home Coalition.
Honestly, the thing that I'm most struck by is that we do not all live in the same world. And it's really hard for me to communicate that. I talk to funders a lot. And it's hard for me to communicate to a funder who's a middle-aged white male how a family of color who lives in East Carroll Parish might struggle to find a job that gives them a living wage and to find housing that they can afford. I went to a meeting in East Carroll Parish recently, and as I was driving into the town, house after house after house was abandoned because I don't know if there's not any base of funding to really restore those houses. I do know that that exists in the state, but I don't see much of that up there at all.
You talked about how you most appreciate the people in your continuum of care because they are always determined, in the face of everything, they're interested in being innovative. And I think that honestly, knowing you, I think that that's somewhat top down. So what are you most excited about? What are you excited about right now?
I've spent so much time focusing on what we don't have and what we need. It's hard to stop and think of what we do have. Our providers are extremely good, and they're doing some really innovative things in the way they're addressing local needs. They're willing to try something new. If they're willing to get training to learn new techniques, new technologies, they're willing to spend on that. I think probably what I'm most excited about at the moment is in the 2023 HUD awards we just heard about, we got 3 new rapid rehousing projects. Our greatest need, in addition to family shelter, is rapid rehousing. And one of those programs has the new funding where you can use some of the rapid rehousing funding to pay in rural parishes to pay for prevention and hotels when there's no shelter there. And that is a real game changer for those parishes. We still have instances in Washita Parish where we don't have available shelter beds. During the pandemic, we had funds for hotels where we could put people in hotels, and that was fabulous. But even now, we really struggle with that. But to know that those funds are going to come online sometime this fall, and we can have that option for people in those parishes is very exciting to me.
Do you all access emergency food and shelter program money through FEMA? Because there is a option for other shelter as that's a category, and that is hotel and motel funding. Generally, your local United Way might be the one that organizes that program, but each parish has an amount that the federal government assigns that they award for each phase, and you might be able to access additional funds using that other shelter categorization, if that is something that your continuum needs.
The Home Coalition does not get any of that funding. A lot of our providers do. A lot of them actually use it for food for their shelters and other things like that. But I will talk to them about that and see if they feel like there's room in the budget for that, and talk to United Way about that also. They're a very appreciated partner. We have our meetings actually at their office where they have a nice hybrid meeting room like you got there.
Yep. So, you're going on 24 years, right? And so with burnout so prevalent, we see, a lot of staff turnover, it's hard work. What's been your key to sustainability? And I mean, the cats might be one of them.
Well, that's true. That's true. Probably it's something that I have to keep in mind all the time, especially because I work from home. And people think, oh, you work at home, it's great. You can, stop and watch TV, but the work follows you home and it stays there. So you have to do a lot of compartmentalizing to make your work there and your home there. But I do tend to from the minute I get up, I'll check my email. So I have to kind of watch that. When we structured the personnel policies for the Home Coalition, we purposely set 35 hours as full-time so that we could have, and we try to have flexibility with the hours, the days of the week that the staff work. If one of us needs to be out with something, we're not real sticklers about having to be at your desk at such and such time.
Right.
So we try to give that flexibility so that we can work that in there. And we have a pretty good schedule for time off and paid holidays and that sort of thing. I think a certain amount of time away from work is important too.
Yeah.
So I guess having access to enough of that and flexibility so that when you need a break, you can just stop and take a break. I guess that's probably my approach to it.
Yeah, yeah. We have a number of people on the call and who join the general meetings who are not necessarily employed in this space, but are just committed and interested in the work. How would you recommend that somebody who is not directly involved participate in the efforts of a COC or that statewide coordination?
Well, with the COC, it's pretty easy. You can participate in the COC meetings. If the COCs have trainings or have newsletters, news announcements, anything like that, you can take part in those and become more informed. But there is a tremendous amount of educational material available online about homelessness. In probably the last 30 years, at the turn of the millennium, in the 2000s, Congress passed a law that all these government programs had to report outcomes and show that what they were doing really worked. So in that time period, that's, I think, probably the impetus for the HMIS to start with. Since then, we have 2 decades and more of data for homelessness, and we've had all that time to look at it and see what works and what doesn't. And the willingness of people to stand up in front of a group and say, that's great, but that's not working. We can do this and it will work. And we can prove it. That to me is incredibly exciting. So if someone was really interested in it and wanted to learn I'm a theory person, so obviously I'm more interested in that. But some people prefer in the work to actually interact with people who are experiencing homelessness and engage with people and to help. Well, all these different programs have volunteer opportunities to go out, everything from the proverbial soup kitchen serving meals to participating in outreach events. We have one group, a church group, that makes what we call welcome home kits, where they might have like cleaning buckets with cleaning supplies and paper products in those, so that when a family moves into a place, they can have that to kind of get settled in, get it tidied up and ready for them to actually live and be comfortable there. We have ladies who knit and make hats, caps. So if there's a lot of, it's that proverbial many hands, one body. There are lots of different ways that you can get engaged in the process if you're interested. If you want to be on the service provision end of it, there's opportunities for that. If you like the technical end of it, like I came to the work through the grant writing end, there's plenty of opportunities for that. Some people prefer to crunch numbers and do accounting. There's opportunities for that. Our current need, I'd love to see happen, that hasn't happened yet, is to find a place where people who have pets that they can't take to the shelters with them can board their pets. Yeah. So that's a different piece of it. The problem's pretty complex. So there's lots of different ways you can get involved in the work if you want to. As far as statewide networking, in all of this work, there are statewide groups who do networking across the state. Like, for example, domestic violence, there's a statewide group, LCADV. We don't yet have a statewide group for homelessness other than the LSNDC, but I'd like to see us go in that direction.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how we work on that, but that's a conversation for a future day, I think.
For sure. Well, I just want to open it up if there's any questions from anybody here, or if there's any questions online, you can drop them in the chat. And we will certainly ask them of Sarah. Is there anything I've forgotten or I didn't think to ask, or you want to share, Sarah, before we wrap it up today?
I think the one thing that I really don't think people get is one size does not fit all with homelessness. That's probably what I tell people the most. I think there are a lot of misconceptions that people have about what causes homelessness, how you help somebody who's homeless, why they become homeless. One of my favorite colleagues says homelessness is the fruit, not the root. And you have to address the root to address the homelessness. So the needs of people who are experiencing homelessness vary based on whatever that root is, whatever the cause of that was. I don't think that people really understand that it's not generic, that someone who's homeless is not necessarily a middle-aged white male individual who is sleeping on a city street, that there's a lot of variety in the population of persons who are experiencing homelessness, and the approach, the answers for them it's not all the same.
Absolutely. Well, I really appreciate your taking this time today to be with us. I know that you don't have to do it, and I appreciate your being willing to. Please let me know if we can ever do anything for you. And as always, I will see you in the next couple of weeks, I'm sure. But thank you so much, Sarah. Does
Sure.
anybody else have any other updates or announcements that they'd like to make before we close out the meeting a little bit early today? Thank you for those of you who shared your information in the chat. And again, this meeting will be followed up with a newsletter with membership opportunities, a link to the recording from this meeting, as well as advocacy opportunities that you can just touch a button, fill in your name, say, I'm for this, I'm against this, and we really value your participation. And like Sarah said, there's lots of ways to get involved. So if you're curious about how you can intersect with this work, please reach out to Arch or reach out to any of the myriad of programs and agencies that you know in our community who are doing the good, right work. So thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you, everybody who joined today. We will see you next month. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.